Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to the American literature subject. We've been doing poetry in the last couple of lectures, and we're going to continue doing that for today and hopefully in the next lecture also. We have done a bit of American literature in this subject so far. And just to remind you of what we have done so that when the exam time comes around, you can't say that this is out of course. So we did Emerson's essay on self-reliance, and we did a couple of short stories, and now we're on to the poetry section. And as I've mentioned before also, poetry forms a very important part of any literature, and particularly American literature. And the poems that we are doing and the poets that we are discussing in this class, they are renowned poets, just as we did renowned writers for the essay and short story section, and the novel also. Similarly, we are doing some of the renowned poets and their poems, because the time doesn't allow us to do the long poems in detail. So what I've done is I've chosen most of the shorter poems so that we have a taste of the writer as well as a taste of the time, and you people don't get very bored. About the only long poem that we'll be doing is going to be the love song of Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. And that we will be doing because that's a very representative poem, and there's no way you can read modern poetry, contemporary poetry, and say that you don't know anything about T.S. Eliot. So that is going to be the longest poem, and that's not a very long poem, so don't get scared off. The poem that we are currently doing is by the poet Ezra Pound, and the poem is titled The Seafarer. We started this poem in the last class, and some of the things that I pointed out about this poem are that one, he is writing a poem from the point of view of a sailor, and not that of a man who just sails for pleasure alone. So this is a professional, this is a sailor, and the sailor gives us his perspective of what it means to sail on the seas. Now this might be different from that of those people who travel by sea, mostly for the sake of pleasure. So when a sailor goes onto the sea, he's going because it's a part of his job. And to the outsider, to the person who does not have sailing as a profession, it appears very attractive. You know, people who sail go to different parts of the world. They get to go away from home and all the responsibilities of a household, because sailors, when they sail, they are gone for months. And to the person who's sitting on shore, it seems as if, you know, he's leading a wonderful existence, and he's away from the worries and cares of the world, so very, very free. And absolutely without responsibility of the daily routine. So what the sailor is telling us, what the seafarer is telling us, is that it's not all that beautiful, and all that glitters is not gold. Whatever you see from far off, you see as something very attractive, but when you see it close up, the way he is seeing sea life, it's not all that fantastic. So, when we ended the poem, the sailor or the seafarer was discussing how he has to do duty at night, and he has to be very careful, because that is the time when he's the only one on duty, and it feels lonely also because he's alone, because it is night, and because there's a great responsibility resting on his shoulders, in the sense that he is responsible for the safety and upkeep of not only the boat but the entire crew. So it's a very big responsibility that he has, and what makes it worse is that that's the time when nobody comes, there's no movement, so he is he's a solitary guard, and it gets to be very cold. So it's cold, it's dark, there's a big responsibility on his shoulders, he's alone, and all this contributes to a little loneliness on the part of the seafarer. So let's see what Pound has to tell us today. Frost froze the land, hail fell on earth then, corn of the coldest. Nevertheless there knocketh now the heart's thought, that I on high streams the salt wavy tumult traverse alone. So the feeling that he is alone, that he is on the sea, and that he has a big responsibility to fulfill. These are the primary feelings that he has, apart from the fact that it's very, very cold and very, very dark. So moaneth away my mind's lust, that I fare forth, that I afar hence seek out a foreign fastness. So he's thinking, and he thinks that you know, he has left his home, he's left his family, and now he is going to what he calls a foreign fastness, or a foreign land. So that thought also disturbs him, because he has left his family far behind. For this there's no mood lofty man over earth's midst, not though he be given his good, but will have in his youth agreed, nor his deeds to the daring, nor his king to the faithful, but shall have his sorrow for seafare, whatever his Lord will. So he says there's no doubt that young men throughout the world feel that it's a wonderful opportunity to be able to go on sea, and to see many different places. And he says that as far as that is concerned, there's no doubt at all that all young men want to go on sea, but not all of them can, not all of them do go on to sea. He hath nor heart nor harping, nor in ring having, nor winsomeness to wife, nor the world's delight, nor any whit else save the waves' slash, yet longing comes upon him to fare forth on the water. So a young man might not have anything in this world. He might not have a wife, he might not have the courage to stay at home, he might have nothing in this world, but he will have the desire to sail. So what the sailor or the seafarer here is trying to point out is that it is every young man's ambition to go onto the high seas, because the sea represents infinity. It represents lack of responsibility. It's an image of total freedom. So it's very appealing to the young men, all of whom want to sail on the sea, because there's a fascination that the sea and sea life have for young men. Bask taketh blossom, cometh beauty of berries, fields to fairness, land fares brisker. All this admonisheth man eager of mood, the heart turns to travel, so that he then thinks on floodways to be far departing. So he says that, you know, trees bear blossoms, and fruit trees have berries, and there's a lot of beauty in this world. And yet whatever is on earth, whatever is on land, is never as beautiful or as powerful as the attraction of the sea. Whatever the land holds, whatever beauty in the form of fruit or flowers or pastures the land holds, it cannot compare to the fascination of the sea. Because he says the heart turns to travel, so that he then thinks on floodways to be far departing. So when he has seen everything in this world, he realizes that the world is a beautiful place, and yet he must go on to the sea. So he thinks on floodways before departing. Cuckoo calleth with gloomy crying, he singeth summer word, bodeth sorrow, the bitter heart's blood. Burgher knows not, he, the prosperous man, what some perform where wandering them widest draweth. So this is not something that a businessman can understand, a burgher can understand, a city man can understand, because he says that when the cuckoo bird sings, he sings to announce the arrival of summer. He also sings to announce spring, but he has a very gloomy song, a very sad song to welcome summer. And just like that, he says, there are people who want to sail on the seas. They know that they are going to be lonely. They know that they will have no friends to confide in, and yet they go and enlist for ships that are flying out. The city man or the businessman has absolutely no idea of what is going on. So he says, he, the prosperous man, what some perform where wandering them widest draweth. So he says that there are a lot of these young men who want to sail on the seas, but not all of them can do it. So that, but now my heart bursts from my breastlock, my mood mid the mere flood, over the whale's acre would wander wide. So he says, you know, this feeling is so strong, is so powerful to sail on the seas, that it's as if your heart is going to burst, and the only thing that will be discovered inside will be the desire to sail on the sea. And he uses various images for the sea. One of these he uses here, and that is the whale's acre. It shows you the size of the whale, because the whale is a humongous animal, and it also refers to the vastness of the sea. So on earth's shelter cometh oft to me, eager and ready, the crying lone flyer, wets for the whale path the heart irresistibly, o'er tracks of ocean, seeing that anyhow my Lord deems to me this dead life on lone and on land. I believe not that on any earth wheel eternal standeth, save there be somewhat calamitous, that ere a man's tide go, turn it to twain. So he says that this is something that I was fated to do. As he says, my Lord deems to me this dead life. He calls it a dead life because when he stands on watch, it is the night time. It is dark, it is silent, and it is very cold. So he calls it a dead life on lone and on land. That is on the sea and on the land. And he says nothing on earth compares to anything on the sea, and people who are standing on the outside do not realize what it is like, don't realize what it entails to be a seafarer or to serve on board ship. Disease or oldness or sword hate beats out the breath from doom-gripped body. So disease or oldness. Generally we talk about old age, we don't talk about oldness, but that's a term that Pound has introduced here. Or sword hate beats out the breath from doom-gripped body. So disease, old age, and what he calls sword hate or war, these are the three things, he says, that sort of destroy the human body. And for this every earl whatever, for those speaking after, Lord of the living, boasteth some last word, that he will work ere he pass onward. So everyone wants something, and in particular those who sail on the sea, they are always under the impression that they are superior to those who live on land, just as those who fly in the air consider everything else beneath their attention and beneath their notice. So do those who are sailing on the seas. They think that people who live on land are hopeless, no good, etc., etc. Frame on the earth, on the fair earth, gainst foes his malice daring do, so that all men shall honor him after, and his lord beyond them remain mid the English, aye forever a lasting life's blast, delight mid the doughty. So whoever wants to sail on the sea, Pound says, must be prepared to die on the sea. You know, if you're willing to live on the sea, you must also be willing to die on the sea, because it has happened countless times that people die on the sea in a ship and never come back. So that all men should honor him after, and he will actually embrace death, because death by water is one of the things that is considered or that has sacred significance. So it contributes to happiness for the steadfast, for the firm, for the ready of resolve, and it is it's a lot of work, and it's a source of pain for those who are out working. Days little durable, and all arrogance of earth riches, there come now no kings nor Caesars, nor gold-giving lords like those gone. However in mirth most magnified, whoever lived in life most lordliest, drear all this excellence, delights undurable. Wanneth the watch, but the world holdeth tomb, hideth trouble. Okay, now he says, whoever lived a comfortable life, a luxurious life, cannot cope with this life, because it is not only dreary, but it is also cold, it's dark, and there's a big responsibility that you have to carry out. The world believes that the tomb hideth trouble. If you cannot be seen, then you are harmless, then you are not contributing to harming people or to harming places. So tomb hideth trouble. The blade is laid low. Earthly glory ageth and seareth. No man at all going the earth's gate, but is age fares against him. His face paleth, grey-haired he groaneth, nose gone companions, lordly men are to earth o'ergiven. Anyway, we'll stop here and go back. So he says, whoever in this world thinks that there's a lot of glory involved in going to sea, does not keep into account the fact that this is a job like any other job. This is a profession like any other profession. And like all other professions, it has its demand. And the demand is that you must be able to function on your own. You must not be dependent on other people. And he says, generations of men have come and gone, and one fact has remained throughout, and that is age fares against him. His face paleth, grey-haired he groaneth, nose gone companions. So he says that, you know, the sort of gist of life is that there is no man born who will not one day grow old, weak, and ultimately die. Kings and queens have died, lords and counselors have died, doctors and teachers have died. Nobody lives forever. This is a fact that all of us have to realize, and that sort of is the gist of what we learn from life, that no one is immortal. Each one of us is a weak human being and must ultimately become weaker and die, cease to exist. Lordly men are to earth o'ergiven. Kings and counselors are also buried in the same dust that beggars and thieves are buried. So this is something that is the reality of life, and that we must face. Nor may he then the flesh cover whose life ceaseth, nor eat the sweet, nor feel the sorry, nor stir hand, nor think in mid-heart. And though he strew the grave with gold, his born brothers, their buried bodies, be an unlikely treasure hoard. Now, Pound is bringing in certain very abstract concepts and certain metaphysical concepts. When he begins this poem, it doesn't appear to be the kind of poem that's going to give a deep philosophy of life. And yet here you see that when this sailor is standing guard, all these thoughts come to his mind, and he starts to think that this is something that is an essential part of life. Each man has desires, each man has ambitions, and a lot of these ambitions are to sail on the seas, but not all of them make it. And yet what all of them do realize is that they may not have anything else in common, but they have this one thing in common, and that is they will all grow old, and they will one day have to die. One day they will grow weak, grow ill, and die. So that's something that is the reality of life, and it affects not only common people, it affects everyone. Anything or anyone who is born must one day die. And when he dies, he will neither be able to eat anything, nor will he be able to feel sorry for anyone. He will not be able to move his hand or his foot. He will not be able to do anything. Now, this is something that is a very deep philosophical thought, that when a man dies, then he cannot do anything. You know, some of the things that we prize in this world are our wealth, our family, and family includes friends also, and the position that we have in society. And yet when a human being comes to an end, when his life ends, everything else remains on earth. The only thing that does not remain on earth is that human being himself. So everything stays here: family, friends, wealth, riches, clothes, jewelry, food, drink, everything remains in this world. The only thing that does not remain is the human being. And once the human being is gone, once he has been buried, you cannot bring him back, even if, as Pound says, he strew the grave with gold. Even if he covers the grave in gold, in wealth, with money, he will not be able to bring back the one who has died. Once you are gone, you do not come back. And for such a person, if you cover the grave with gold, it will be a treasure that the person concerned will never be able to appreciate. It's going to be an attraction for maybe grave robbers, but it will not have any attraction for the person who is deceased, because he is no more. Okay, that's the end of The Seafarer. We are going to go on to the poem that I told you about in the very beginning, and that is The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock. The poet is T.S. Eliot, and this is a poem that is slightly longer than the poems that we've been doing so far. But don't get scared of, like I said, it's an interesting poem. And anyone who is studying American literature has to read this poem at least once. The Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock is not a love story as you would expect it to be, but is a poem about the conditions of human beings in the time of T.S. Eliot. Now there is a lot of let's say symbolism, a lot of imagery in Prufrock, and you have to read this text very carefully. It starts off with a quote in Latin, which I have translated for you, or rather I've copied the translation from the internet. And this means, translated, it means, if I but thought that my response were made to one perhaps returning to the world, this tongue of flame would cease to flicker. But since up from these depths no one has yet returned alive, if what I hear is true, I answer without fear of being shamed. And of course, this is a quote from Dante's Inferno, and Eliot is borrowing a few lines from the Inferno. And even when you translate it and you sort of try to have it explained, what it comes to is that those who die do not return to the world, do not return to this world. And those who have died and been buried centuries ago, they are still dead. They cannot come back to this world. They cannot come back to life. Okay? Now, Eliot starts this poem, and it's a kind of monologue. It's actually J. Alfred Prufrock who is speaking. So it's in the first person, and there's a lot of descriptive detail. It's like a narrative. It's like a conversation and we hear one part of the conversation. So Prufrock says, "Let us go, then you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky, like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels." Okay. So let us go, then you and I, when the evening is spread out against the sky. He addresses this companion, this imaginary companion, and he says, okay, let's go for a walk and let us see what the city has to offer us. Now, in this instance, Eliot is very different from somebody like, let's say, Wordsworth, who would say, say, let's go for a walk, and his walk would mean that you walk in nature, that you take a walk through the woods, or you walk along the shore of the lake, or you climb a mountain. With Eliot, it's none of these things. The walk that he does want you to take is probably in the city center. So the images that he brings up are out of various fields of life. The first image that he brings up is out of medicine, and he talks about a patient etherized upon the table. He says that evening is so still. It's as still as a patient who has just been given medicine to put him to sleep, to make him unconscious. So the evening is like a patient etherized upon a table. Let us go through certain half-deserted streets, the muttering retreats of restless nights in one-night cheap hotels. So whatever is the worst about city life, Eliot is going to bring that in, and he's going to present that to you to analyze. Now, there's one thing that you need to remember, and that is that in contemporary writing, particularly contemporary American writing, there is no didacticism, there is no instruction, no morals on the surface or hidden. What contemporary poets and contemporary writers are doing is that they are dissecting the situation as it is presented on ground. They look upon everything from under a microscope. You know how you look at something on the microscope? You put something on a slide and you just push it under the microscope, and then when you look at it through the microscope, you are able to see the different parts, the different atoms and molecules that make up that particular object. But you do not say that this is right and this is wrong, because that would be instruction, that would be moralizing. And that's something that contemporary writers are not doing. So when Eliot talks about taking a walk, he also refers to restless nights being spent in one-night cheap hotels. And he's talking about the fact that there's a lot of discontentment in the population because the difference between the haves and the have-nots kept increasing until the haves had, oodles of money, and the have-nots had nothing. They did not have clean drinking water. They did not have enough to eat. They were not able to enjoy anything that this world has to offer. So whatever he is going to do, he has to prioritize. He needs to have it examined and re-examined. So restless nights in one-night cheap hotels and sawdust streets with oyster shells, streets that follow like a tedious argument of insidious intent to lead you to an overwhelming question. So sawdust restaurants with oyster shells, places which have not been cleaned properly, streets that follow like a tedious argument. A tedious argument is one that's winding, you know, streets that go winding in, not straight roads, not straight avenues lined with elm trees on both sides, nothing of the kind. And an argument, a tedious argument, is one that goes on and on and on. And there seems to be no resolution to the problem. So he says it leads us to an overwhelming question. And what is it? Do not ask what is it. Don't ask me the question, but let's go and take a round of the city. Let us go and make our visit. And then there's a gap, and Eliot says, in the room, women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Now, interspersing the idea of Michelangelo here would make you think that, you know, these women are very intelligent and very cultivated and sophisticated, and they are discussing the painting style of Michelangelo. But no, in the room, women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. Michelangelo is one of the greatest Italian artists. He was a sculptor, he was a painter, he did so many different things. So in certain sections of society, it's very fashionable to say that you can understand art. You know, all of a sudden it became a fashion to study art. And not only did it become a fashion to study art, but it became even more fashionable to discuss art. And so these women who talk about Michelangelo as they come and go, as they enter the room and then leave the room, they do not have any thoughts about the seriousness of purpose that Michelangelo had. All they are concerned with is Michelangelo is famous, Michelangelo forms a good topic of discussion, let us discuss Michelangelo, without any thought being given to the kind of work that he has done and the way in which he should be greeted or he should be meted. So in the room the women come and go, talking of Michelangelo. The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes, the yellow smoke that rubs its muzzle on the window panes, licked its tongue into the corners of the evening, lingered upon the pools that stand in drains, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. Okay. Now, when he goes out for a walk, what does he see? As he's leaving the room, he sees women coming and going, and he hears the name Michelangelo. He doesn't understand what they are discussing, but he does know that they are discussing Michelangelo. So he leaves the room, he leaves the party, and he goes out into the city. And what does he see in the city? The yellow fog that rubs its back upon the window panes. That is something that he sees. You know, inside the room it's very nice, there's a party going on, lots of people, lots of drinks and maybe some food, but when he comes out, all of a sudden it's quiet. Not only is it quiet, but he sees fog. Inside the room, it was bright lights. Outside, when he goes, there's darkness and there's fog. And he, remember what I told you about the imagery that Eliot comes up with? Here he presents the image of fog as something, something living. And the symbol that he uses is that of a cat. You know, like a cat stretches itself or it licks with its tongue. That's the kind of imagery that Eliot has used here. Not, let's say, positive ideas or positive images, but somehow negative images by relating fog to an animal, an animal like a dog or a cat. And then he says, let fall upon its back the soot that falls from chimneys. And here again he's pointing out to the smoke in the atmosphere because of the process of industrialization. So this fog, it sort of absorbs all the soot that is in the air, and he says, slipped by the terrace, made a sudden leap, and seeing that it was a soft October night, curled once about the house and fell asleep. So this fog, it seems to rise, jump up like an animal, and then almost in mid-stride, it sees that the night is soft, it's October, it's not December yet, and so it just curls around that building and goes off to sleep. Again, animal imagery that has been used. It's just like a cat that starts to make a leap and midway thinks, no, not now. And then it just sort of goes off to sleep after having curled itself on the mat. So definitely animal features that have been given to fog. And indeed, there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. Again, animal imagery, you see. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions, and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of a toast and tea. Okay, let's go back. So he says that this fog, it curls around the building and settles. It doesn't go away. He says it fell asleep. So it's still curled around the building, but it's stationary now. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions. Now this poem particularly reflects, as critics call it, the dilemma of modern man. And the dilemma of modern man is that he's not decisive. He's not appreciative of the chances and opportunities that he gets, and he is indecisive. And in this case, the modern man has very frequently been compared with the character of Hamlet that Shakespeare has presented, where he just cannot decide what to do. So modern man, according to Eliot and Pound and the other existentialists, is not ready to decide what he wants and what he does not want. So there are 100 indecisions, there are 100 revisions and revisions. You have the vision, you have the image, and then that's revised, and then that's further revised before the taking of a toast and tea. And all this happens in a very short span of time. If I take you back to Hamlet, the very famous Soliloquy of Hamlet, where he says, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, etc., etc., etc. So what he's talking about is basically postponing action. And what Eliot here is emphasizing is also the fact that the youth of today is indecisive. The youth of today cannot accept responsibility, cannot therefore make decisions, and all that they are interested in is entertainment. As far as responsibility goes, the youth is not willing to take it. But if you talk about entertainment, you talk about food and drink, they're all for it. In the room, the women come and go. Now this is like a refrain. In the room, women come and go, talking of Michelangelo, because he cannot stop thinking about the room where this sort of party is being held, and women very prettily dressed enter the room, and they leave the room, and they try to pretend, try to give out that they are they're intellectuals and they know a lot about art. So these two lines act as a kind of refrain in this poem, because Eliot uses it more than once. And indeed there will be time to wonder, do I dare, and do I dare? And this is the part that refers to Hamlet. Time to turn back and descend the stair. You can't turn back time, but the youth of today, or modern man as Eliot calls him, is not willing to take on responsibility, and when he is faced with responsibility, his immediate action is to turn time back, to turn the clock back, descend the stair. The stairs that he has just ascended, he would like to go back. And he thinks that if he just descends the stairs, he can erase whatever has happened. But that is not so. You cannot erase what has happened. It is there, it's a part of your life, whether you like it or not. So, is there time to turn back and descend the stair with a bald spot in the middle of my hair? Now, there's a special time in which you can undo things. When you're young, when you're strong, you're full of life, you can do things and you can undo them. But there comes a time in life, particularly when you reach middle age, there's a very strong realization of your own inadequacy. Of the fact that you can't do the things that you could when you were a young man, and then you want to turn back the clock. And this is the time when you have ascended the staircase. So when you ascend the staircase, as long as you are climbing, you're satisfied. Once you come to the top of the staircase, when you reach middle age, you want to turn back, but you can't do that. You cannot go back, and you want to go back because Eliot says there's a bald spot in the middle of my hair. My hair is going. That's a sign of approaching middle age, and I just want to go back to my youth, but I'm unable to do that. I can't even descend the staircase because I am only too conscious of my approaching middle age. And he doesn't want to descend the staircase because when he turns his back, people are going to see the bald spot in the middle of his hair and say, oh, how his hair is growing thin. My morning coat, my collar mounting firmly to the chin, my necktie rich and modest, but asserted by a simple pin. They will say, but how his arms and legs are thin. So now he is in a party and he is trying to appear young, yet he is not young. He has reached a point in time where he dresses nicely, as he says, I'm wearing my morning coat, I have my collar mounting firmly to the chin. You know, that was the time when you had high collars. Sometimes you have very thin collars, sometimes you have broad lapels. But he says that I am dressed perfectly, and yet, you know, people might say, why is he trying to look young? He is not young anymore. So these two statements, that he keeps on hearing in his mind, they upset him. How his hair is growing thin and how his arms and legs are thin, both reflective of approaching middle age, both reflecting the passage of time, both reminding him that he is not as young and strong as he used to be. So, this is the dilemma. Do I dare? And how his arms and legs are thin. This is what sort of preoccupies his mind, and he cannot get these statements out of his head. Do I dare disturb the universe? In a minute, there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse. So, do I have the courage to go into that party in my middle age and pretend that I am of the same age as them? It takes a lot of courage, because there are certain preconceived notions, and those notions cannot be disturbed. For example, youth is the time when you party, middle age is the time when you work and when you advise people, and old age is when you relive your experiences. So in the universe in which Prufrock operates, there are very clear-cut rules and regulations. There are boxes, and you cannot go outside your box. You cannot jump into somebody else's box, which is what Prufrock wants to do by coming to this party. He wants to join the younger crowd. But he says, do I dare do that? Do I dare disturb the universe? Do I dare break the law which says that in middle age I cannot go to that party, and that I must go and sit with people of my own age group? Because in a minute you can reverse everything. In a minute you can sort of rewind and replay. And he talks about revisions and countless revisions. And within a minute, you can change those decisions. So this indecisiveness is something that is typically found in contemporary American literature. The uncertainty of what is going to happen and how it's going to happen. For I have known them all already, known them all, have known the evenings, mornings, afternoons. I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. Beautiful lines. So he says, I know everything. I know that there are laws which govern the universe. I know that there are laws which govern the world of man. And these laws state that once your youth is over, you cannot go back, you cannot bring it back, and then you have to start acting your age. In your 50s, you can't act like a 25-year-old and hope that it will be appreciated. So he says, I have known them all. I have been to these parties. I have had discussions with intellectuals, and I have measured out my life with coffee spoons. I have gauged my life. I know what I have done. I know why I have done it, and I know how I can do it better. But none of this can be changed. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the butt ends of my days and ways? So he says, I can't disturb the universe. There's a set order, there's a set pattern. I have to abide by that. And I know all these laws because I have contributed to making these laws. When I was young, I made sure that I had no interaction with old people or with elderly people or even middle-aged people, because I thought that I had everything worked out to a T. I could measure my life with coffee spoons. I could tell you the detail of each and everything that had happened to me. I could go back in my memory and retrace everything. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So when I enter the room, I sense the change in the atmosphere of the room. I can sense that people have stopped talking when they see me entering the room. So they don't want to share anything with him because he's not of their age group. I know the voices dying with a dying fall beneath the music from a farther room. So how should I presume? And I have known the eyes already, known them all. So there's nothing that that has been hidden from him. He's aware of everything. He knows the laws that govern the universe of man. He knows the looks that elderly people are given, and he says that those looks are such as would kill. As he says, the eyes that fix you in a formulated phrase. And when I am formulated, sprawling on a pin, when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the buttons of my days and ways? So he says, I know all these things. I know all these people. They look at me as if I am a specimen. They look at me as if they are scientists and I am like an insect that has been pinned onto a wall and which everyone is looking at. So again, this is an image that is out of, what do you call it, botany, zoology. Zoology, where you have these creatures and you stick pins in them and you put them on a board and then you look at them through the microscope and you say, oh, okay, these are the systems that the insect has, etc., etc. So you study that insect. That's what Prufrock feels like. He feels that he is subjected to a very close scrutiny. And this scrutiny is almost like being put under the microscope, because there's nothing you can do. You can only sit there on that sort of glass slide and wriggle around like an insect, which is what he feels like. And so he takes this imagery a little further, and he says that I'm like a fly or an insect that you have stuck with a pin onto the wall, and now I am being studied. So when I am pinned and wriggling on the wall, then how should I begin to spit out all the buttons of my days and ways? So I'm pinned and wriggling against the wall, you look at me, you poke me, you prod me, I can do nothing. And that's the kind of depiction that Prufrock has. And how should I presume? And I have known the arms already, known them all. Arms that are braceleted and white and bare, but in the lamplight, downed with light brown hair. Is it perfume from a dress that makes me so digress? Okay, so he says, I can't be presumptuous, I can't say that I have, that I am young and that I'm going to join you people and I can run around and I can do everything that I could as a youth. I can't do those. So how should I presume? Especially because I am aware of these people, I have known them all, And here there's a sort of a slight reference to the fact that Prufrock has had relationships with women. When he talks about these arms, these are bodies that he has observed very closely. And Eliot gives you the minute, detailed observation when he says that in the lamplight, these arms are bare, and yet when you look at them very closely, you see the light brown hair. So he says, I have known these women, I have known these people very intimately, very closely, and so I cannot pretend to be something that I am not. I am in middle age, and my youth is past, but it's still very difficult to accept the fact that you can no more do the things that you could when you were a young man. So it's not the physical presence of these women that makes him digress. And then he goes back to the beginning. So this is, something that is very, very much found in contemporary literature. You go to a particular point in time, and then you come back, and then you go forward, etc., etc. So shall I say, I have gone at dusk through narrow streets, and watched the smoke that rises from the pipes of lonely men in shirt sleeves, leaning out of windows. I should have been a pair of ragged claws, scuttling across the floors of silent seas. So I have known everything. Prufrock, by the time he reaches middle age, has interacted with a lot of people. He has attended parties. He knows the way people's minds work. And the one thing that bothers him the most is that he's growing old, that he no longer has the strength that he could use earlier. And he doesn't want to be compared to lonely men in shirt sleeves leaning out of windows, because those men are like him. He has put on his morning coat, and he thinks he's a dandy, and he's going to a place where you have all these young people. And he sees that these men in shirt sleeves, they're hanging out of windows, seeing what is going on, because they don't have much in their own lives now. So he says, I know that that is my ultimate end also. Ultimately, I am going to go to some such place. But the time, he says, is not yet here. I should have been a pair of ragged claws scuttling across the floors of silent seas. And the afternoon, the evening, sleeps so peacefully. Smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired. Or it malingers, stretched on the floor here beside you and me. Should I, after tea and cakes and ices, have the strength to force the moment to its crisis? So the reference to a pair of ragged claws is, of course, a reference to a crab. It's a crab that scuttles sideways. He says, scuttling across the floor of silent seas. The crab lives at the bottom of the sea. It also lives on the shore. And the one thing that is specific to a crab is that it doesn't walk forwards or backwards. It walks sideways, and that motion is known as scuttling. And so when he gets to this point, there's a break in the narrative, and then he says, and the afternoon, the evening, sleeps so peacefully, smoothed by long fingers, asleep, tired, or it malingers. Again, he is giving animate features to the afternoon and the evening. Now, the constant reference to the afternoon and the evening, of course, is a reference to passing age, is a reference to the fact that Prufrock is no longer young. He's in his middle age. So he refers again and again to the afternoon and the evening. Now we're going to stop here for the time being. Like I told you, it's a slightly long poem, and we'll complete the rest of it in the next class. But let me quickly go through the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. It's a poem that is very representative of modern man and his dilemma, and it underlines how human beings find it difficult in the post-World War scenario to make up their minds. There's so much confusion, there's so much of ambiguity in the world that there can be nothing nothing that can be taken simply. Nothing is easy to answer. You have all these questions of how far can we go? Can we do this? Can we not do this? And why can we not? So there's all that confusion in the mind, so many questions that rise in the minds of people. And Eliot has, in the tradition of the poets of the time, Eliot has tried to expose whatever the modern men are faced with, and put it on the table and then examine it very closely and see what has actually happened. But what Eliot and his contemporaries have not done is to provide you with solutions. There is no instruction, there is no didacticism in this poetry. He's just described to you the situation of modern man and the confusion and the chaos in his mind. So we're going to stop here, and we'll do some more inshallah in the next class, and also wind up Prufrock. Thank you for being patient, and Allah Hafiz.